Groups of muscles are separated by which of the following? The endomysium, the perimysium, the epimysium, the fascia, the fascicles. I want you to put the answer in the comment section below. Do you even know the differences between the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium? Do you know the differences between these three and the fascia? These and many other questions we are going to discuss today. Today we are discussing muscular system, not muscular physiology. I already handled muscular physiology in my last slide. I will shed a little light on it also here, but today we are discussing muscle as a whole, as a system. Jumping straight in as an introduction, I want you to know what myology is, because this is one of your questions. They may ask you, the scientific study of muscles and muscular system is called what? Myology. Extremely important for you to know what we are talking about. Also, you need to know the three types of muscles, which I took time to explain in my last video. One is the cardiac muscle, the other one is smooth, and another one is skeletal. All right? All of them has their equal importance. Very, very important for you to know the differences, which ones are voluntary, which ones are involuntary, which ones are striated, and which ones not striated. Right? As I said in my last video, I'll still mention it here also. Skeletal muscle are voluntary and they are striated. Right? The light and the dark band made them striated. While the cardiac muscle is also striated, it has intercalated disc, but it is involuntary. The smooth muscle is not striated, that's why it's smooth. All right? And it is also involuntary. So these are the differences, the things you need to know about this. Also, you need to know very importantly that there are approximately 600 muscles in the human anatomy, approximately. Right? If you look at the picture here, you see the skeletal muscle arrangement, you see the cardiac muscle arrangement, you see the smooth muscle arrangement. Looking at this diagram, what are you seeing? That's the question. What do you see from this diagram? We are looking at a sarcomere, right? Sarcomere is a functional unit from Z disc to Z disc with distinct bands visible under the microscope. That is what a sarcomere is. Then we ask you a question in your exam. What is a sarcomere? You must know that sarcomere is that unit between a Z and another Z. What am I talking about? If you look at this diagram, you see this is a Z, this is another Z. In between here and here, you have the sarcomere. So here and here is sarcomere. Here and here is a sarcomere. Very important for you to know. First of all, what are we even looking at? This is a muscle cell. I told you, muscle cells are known as what? Muscle fiber. All right? So this is a muscle cell. If you bring out one of the myofibril, this is a myofibril containing what? Containing the myofilaments. All right? We have the contractile proteins, which is actin and the myosin. We've already discussed this. That's physiology. Remember, I told you that anatomy is what? Location, location, location. I can even say structure, structure, structure. But physiology is what? Function, function, function. You are expected to know what the light band is, what the I band is, what the A band is, what the line is, what the H zone is. You are expected to know these things. So if you look at this diagram properly, you see this is a Z disc. If you notice, by the two sides of the Z disc, there's a light area. That light area, we call it light band or I band. So I band is from here to here. Extremely important that you know this. If you notice, there is this middle area is dark, all right? So we call it dark band or A band, all right? So A band is from here to here. The A band is the only place you'll be able to see what? A myosin, all right? There's a cross link in between a myosin and an actin, this area, all right? Now, the actin stopped somewhere here. Another actin, that's here. Another one stopped here. In between these two areas where you see only myosin, we call it what? H zone. In the middle of H zone, we have the line. You must know these things. Because in exam, they can give you this diagram. They'll put A here, put B here, put C here. And they ask you, what is it? You should be able to know which one is light band, I band, A band, line, H zone, sarcomere, actin, and even myosin. All right? As a way of recapping the physiology, if you remember this diagram properly, this is a neuromuscular what? Junction. In this neuromuscular junction, this area is called what? Synaptic cleft. This bulging area is the synaptic knob of this neuron, all right? This is the terminal end of a neuron. This is muscle fiber, all right? So in between a muscle fiber and a neuron, we call it neuron, muscular, muscle. So neuromuscular what? Junction. What do we have in this junction? First of all, remember, because of the sodium entering in and raising the threshold up from minus 90 upwards, right? That's from the resting stage to beyond the threshold. Action potential is created, correct? This action potential comes down. If you notice, this line is the action potential coming down. What does this action potential do? The action potential will cause calcium to enter into this synaptic knob. Calcium will burst all these vesicles, burst them. And the vesicle will pour out their neurotransmitters. What is a neurotransmitter? A neurotransmitter is something that transmits information, right? From, transmits information from a neuron to another neuron, or from a neuron to a muscle. All right. So this time around, the neurotransmitter for skeletal muscle usually is acetylcholine. So these things are vesicles. So this acetylcholine will pour in here, and immediately pour in here. What does acetylcholine do? It will attach it in the sarcolemma. Remember what a sarcolemma is? A sarcolemma is the plasma membrane of a muscle. We call it sarcolemma. So immediately it will attach to the receptor on a sarcolemma. Immediately attaches itself to the receptor on the sarcolemma. What happens? There's an opening of the sodium channel. Then sodium will rush. Remember, sodium is the major extracellular cation. It's always outside. So what it will do, it will rush in. Once it rush into the cell, it will increase the cell's positivity, right? So immediately there's a positivity, action potential is formed. All right. So this area, action potential is triggered. And what happens if action potential is triggered? If you can recap what we discussed in the last video, immediately action potential is triggered in the muscle fiber, right? It sends, the action potential enters into the muscle fiber, into the muscle itself through the T-tubule. So it rushes down through the T-tubule. Immediately, remember, there's two systems, which is the sarcoplasmic reticulum, right? Housing the calcium in the muscle fiber. So immediately the action potential comes down, it pushes the calcium out. The calcium rushes to troponin, holds onto the troponin. Then the troponin will move the tropomyosin. The tropomyosin is blocking the active site of actin. And immediately, myosin will use ADP, add it with phosphate, making it ATP. That's energy, gets energy, and it will lap in the active site of that actin that has been opened up by the tropomyosin, controlled by the troponin, which is indirectly controlled by the calcium, or rather, directly. And immediately, myosin matches with actin. What happens? Contraction occurs. This is like a recap. This is not what we are discussing today, but this is a recap, all right? Now let's talk about the most important things we have to discuss today. Very brief discussion. There are key functions of muscles, right? Movement, stability, control of openings, heat production, rather. All right? So this, you have to know the key functions. They will ask you. Other functions include hormone secretion, glycemic control. Now, this is the organization. I told you, this is a muscle fiber, all right? This is a fascicle, and this is the muscle itself. So a fascicle houses a lot of muscle fibers. So one muscle fiber is being covered by the endomysium, a fascicle is being covered by the perimysium, and the entire fascicles together are covered by epimysium. You have to take note of this. And what is separating? You understand? That connective tissue that separates two muscles together is known as what? Fascia. You must know the difference between the fascia and the endomysium, the fascia and the perimysium, the fascia and the epimysium. You must know the difference because they will ask you. Remember the question I asked from the beginning? I said, a group of muscles are separated by which of the following? The answer is fascia. The answer is fascia. So muscle separated, fascia. But when they are asking you about a muscle fiber being wrapped around it, it is the endomysium. If they ask you about a fascicle, that's a group of muscle fiber, it is known as what? Perimysium. If they ask you group of fascicles, it is known as what? Epimysium. Now let's talk about the shapes, all right? There are different shapes muscles can possess, all right? One is the fusiform, pannate, circular, fusiform, pannate, circular, parallel, triangular. You must know these things. If you are given diagrams like this, as you are seeing right now, are you able to identify these things? For example, look, if you look closely, this is the body of fusiform. You will know fusiform by the body. The body is fat. So thick in the middle with tapered ends. This extreme. But this is pannate. You see? This is pannate. Like a feather. spreading out. And this is circular. Circular is straightforward, very, very straightforward. Then we have parallel. We have parallel, the ones that, they don't meet each other. Then we have triangular. That one is very straightforward. If you see it, you'll definitely be able to recognize it. So you need to go and look at diagrams. There are questions like this. In terms of muscle attachment, some muscles we just attach directly to bone without any structure. They don't need help. They are good by themselves, like, cream de la cream muscles. That's what I always call them. Now, there are some muscles that need something to connect them to bones. That's an indirect attachment. They need something like tendon. So that's what a tendon is. So a tendon is a cord, a fibrous cord that connects a muscle to bone. All right? That's an indirect attachment. So if I ask you something about tendon, you need to tell me that it's an indirect attachment. All right? That is for me. Now, what is aponeurosis? Aponeurosis, tendons that flap out this way. Like if you look at the diagram, you will see this is palmar aponeurosis. It's actually a tendon. This is it. Palmaris longus tendon, come here, spreads out. So an aponeurosis is a tendon that spreads out. All right? Now, when you're talking about retinaculum is something that makes a tendon strong. Like if you look at these different tendons, this is retinaculum, this sheet. It helps, it's a band of connective tissue, stabilizes the tendon, makes the tendon strong. Also, you need to know the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. All right? Intrinsic muscles usually contain entirely within a region, right? While extrinsic muscles, they act on a region, but from somewhere else. They arise from somewhere else. But intrinsic muscles, they arise from here and they're functioning here. All right? You need to know this difference because you will be asked in your exams. All right? Now, muscle action categories. We have prime movers, we have synergists, we have antagonists, we have fixator. You must be able to know this. When you're talking about a fixator, you're talking about a muscle that stabilizes a bone during a movement. It holds a bone one place. Then you talk about prime mover, it produces most force. All right? Then you talk about synergist. Synergist is the one that, has to assist a prime mover for them to achieve something that is good. Antagonist, a prime mover. It's always very important that you should know that, okay, this is a prime mover, always. In terms of muscle innervation and blood supply, you need to be aware that the muscles receive about 25% cardiac output, all right, when they are at rest. And when they are doing exercise, about 75%. That's a lot, all right? You should know about cranial nerves, you know about spinal nerves. When you're talking about spinal nerves, you're talking about the ones that are emerged from the spinal cord. And what do? They innervate muscles below the neck, downwards. But when you're talking about cranial nerves, they are the ones that emerge from the brain itself. And they innervate muscles of the head and neck. So you must know that nerves that innervate the entire muscles of your body, we have cranial, we have spinal. Spinal innervates here, down. All right? Cranial innervates here, up. All right? And blood supply and capillary network. Capillary network is very, very important because, this is what helps to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the muscles. If you have a problem with capillary network, it's a serious problem. Now, when somebody comes to the hospital, there are a lot of ways we can check for a cranial nerve 7, right? Like I can tell you to smile, I can tell you to chew, I can tell you to whistle, I can tell you to fold your face, I can tell you, you get? So these are the ways that we can decipher a cranial nerve 7, if it's functional or not, all right? Now, if you look at the picture, you see different facial expressions controlled by cranial nerve 7. Remember this. Now, there's something we call modulus. Modulus is actually a point of convergence for several facial muscles. Extremely important for you to know this because I see this question all the time. What is modulus? What is modulus? I may be pronouncing it wrong, but please, you need to know what it means. When you talk about mastication, we have the temporalis, we have the masseter, we have the lateral and the medial pterygoid. All right? You must know that these muscles, you must know exactly what these muscles do. Very, very important. For example, the temporalis, what does it do? It elevates the mandible and retracts it. Elevation and retraction. All right? When you talk about the masseter helps to elevate the mandible for chewing also. And when you talk about the lateral and medial pterygoid, they control the side-by-side jaw movements. All right? So these are the major, not only, but major muscles of mastication. When you talk about tongue muscles, we have the intrinsic and extrinsic, as I've discussed initially. The intrinsic muscles of the tongue, they lie completely inside, entirely within the tongue. The extrinsic some of them lie outside, the tongue, and they act on the tongue. Make sense? Now, We have the hyoid muscles, all right? The hyoid muscles is divided into two. We have the suprahyoid and the infrahyoid based on their location of the hyoid bone, all right? Very, very important. The ones that are above the supra, the ones that are below are the infra. Now, this is also something that they're always asking in your body exams, especially NCLEX, and also in your college exams. They want to know muscles acting on the head and neck. All right? We have the flexors, we have the extensors, and we have the rotators. All right? So remember that sternocleidomastoid and scalene flex the muscle, the neck. They flex the neck. So if you ask, what flex the neck? Sternocleidomastoid, scalene. Extensors, you're talking about trapezius and splenius. Rotators, you are talking about semispinalis. Please bear in mind, this is exactly how it works on the neck. All right. I need you to take your atlas, look at it. You should be able to identify these muscles. How many muscles did I mention here? 5 of them. We have the sternocleidomastoid, we have the scalene, we have the trapezius, we have the splenius, and we have the semispinalis. All right. Those are the 5 of them. You need to be able to know because they act on the neck. Will you marry me? Yes. Will you marry me? No. Do you understand? In terms of breathing, these are another group of muscles that is very important for you to know because there's no question, nobody will set a question for you without mentioning muscles of respiration. And there are 3 of them that you need to know, which are the diaphragm, the external intercostal, and internal intercostal. Which one is the prime mover? Do you remember what prime mover is? Don't scroll back, don't scroll back. Attempt it. Just go to the comment section and write anything, all right? Okay, so the diaphragm is a prime mover for inspiration, all right? Very important because you will see this question. The external intercostals, they help to, elevate ribs during inspiration, all right? While the internal helps to depress the ribs during expiration. You have to know these differences. Very important. Now we are going to the abdomen. We've passed the thorax, we are in the abdomen. Remember what we are doing? I am selecting, the important muscles that they usually ask in your exams, both college, body exams for your AP1 and AP2, and also for your NCLEX. So I'm trying to select them one after the other. Now for abdominal wall muscles, we have the external oblique, we have the internal oblique, we have the transversus abdominis, and we have the rectus abdominis. There are little information that are repeated always, such as in terms of the external oblique, you have to know that external oblique is the most superficial. That's the most external. All right? And the deepest is the transverse abdominis. So if they ask you which one is the deepest in the abdomen, tell them it is transverse abdominis. Which one is the most superficial? Tell them it is external oblique. Why? The middle oblique is just in between, running perpendicular to the external oblique, right? Now, we have the rectus abdominis. Rectus abdominis is very, very important because, it's a vertically paired muscle that forms the 6-pack. So when you're talking about 6-packs, you talk about rectus abdominis. All right? If you look at this diagram, you see it. So I need you to take your time and look at the diagram of the abdominal muscles and identify these 4 of 1, 2, 3, 4. All right? Very, very important. And if you go to the thorax for respiration, look for diaphragm, look for external intercostal, look for internal intercostal. And when you go to the muscles of the back, the muscles you should know about is the trapezius and latissimus dorsi. They are the most superficial at the back. Superficial, trapezius and latissimus dorsi. Intermediate, serratus posterior. Deep, we have the rector spinae, and we also have the quadratus lumborum. Extremely important that you know these muscles. And you know their positioning. You need to know which one is superficial and which one is deep. Mind you, your questions are usually superficial questions. Nobody's going to go deep because you are not doing masters in anatomy. All right? So I want you to marry this review with your lecture slides. It doesn't substitute for it. It's just a review guide. All right? Now let's talk about muscles that move the scapula. Very important for you to know. We have the anterior group, we have the posterior group. All right? Remember, this is the scapula. You understand? It has a head with the humerus here. All right? Now, we have muscles like the pectoralis minor, the serratus anterior. You must know that these are the ones that protract the scapula. The P minor and the serratus anterior. The P minor and the serratus anterior. Extremely important for you to know these muscles. Now, when you are talking about the posterior, what are you talking about? You're talking about the trapezius, we are talking about levator scapulae, and we are talking about rhomboid. What do? Trapezius elevate and depress and retract. Levator scapulae elevates, rhomboid retracts. So trapezius does the function of levator scapulae and the rhomboids. That's how you need to know these two things together. All right? So elevate, retract, elevate and retract, as well as depress. Very important. Okay, let's talk about the arm. It's very important for you to know the muscles that works, on the arm, like helps to rotate, the shoulder. You understand? So we have 4 of them. We call them the rotator cuff muscles, SITS, S-I-T-S, S-I-T-S. So we have the supraspinatus here, above the spine of the scapula. We have the infraspinatus. Then this area we have this is the T minor, and also we have subscapularis. So when you hear the SITS, they may tell you one of the following is a rotator cuff muscle. Remember SITS, S-I-T-S. That's supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. Now, other muscles that move, they talk about the deltoid. What does deltoid do? It helps abduction, that's abduction, flexion, and extension. We have the P major, we have the latissimus dorsi. You need to know the function of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These work together, but they have different functions. But the most important thing, you need to be able to identify them. You need to know what deltoid does. You need to know what P major is. You need to know what latissimus dorsi is. Very important. Remember, I told you that this is the foot and this is the hand. All right? Extremely important for you to know. Now, you need to know the muscles acting on the forearm, rather. They have the flexors, we have the extensors, we have the rotators. All right? The flexors, we are talking about the brachialis. All right? Very important. We have the bicep brachii and we have the brachioradialis. While the extensors, you're talking about triceps brachii and also the anconus. Very important. All right? Then we have the rotator cuff muscle, the rotators rather, like the pronators. A lot of pronators like pronator quadratus, pronator teres, and also we have supinators that help to supine. We have this supinator itself. We have the bicep brachii, also helps to supine. So these are muscles that act on the forearm. So you can actually categorize them into flexors, extensors, and also rotators. Then we have the muscles of the hand. All right? We have the extrinsic hand muscles, we have the thenar muscles, we have the hypothenar muscles, we have the mid-palmar muscles. All right? You have to know where these muscles belong. And you have to know the examples of each of them. Extrinsic hand muscles, you're talking about the flexor and the extensor digitorum muscles. Thenar muscles, right? You are talking about the ones that are located at the base of the thumb. Example is opponent's pollicis. We have the hypothenar located at the base of the little finger, and we have the mid-palmar. All right? That's the lumbricals. Very, very important for you to be able to identify it. All these muscles here. Now we are on the hips. What muscles are important for you to know? We have the iliopsoas, we have the gluteus maximus, we have the gluteus medius and minimus, and we have the adductor group. All right? The iliopsoas is the primary hip flexor. If you are asked, what is the primary hip flexor? Iliopsoas. What does it contain? 2 muscles, iliacus and what? Psoas major. Hip flexor, primary hip flexor, iliopsoas. What does it contain? Iliacus and what? Psoas major. And when you're talking about the gluteus maximus, it is the largest and is the primary hip extensor. If you are asked about hip extensor, talk about gluteus maximus. If you are asked about hip flexor, talk about iliopsoas. If you are talking about hip abductors, talk about minimus, medius. They really help you to balance when you're walking. Abductors. If you are talking about adductor, all right, that's adductor group, right? There are 5 muscles that pull the thigh towards the midline, which we are going to discuss later. But most importantly, you need to know the primary hip flexor, primary hip extensor, and also the abductors. Now, as I was saying initially, those muscles include 4 quadriceps muscles, 3 hamstring muscles, and the sartorius. What do you need to bear in mind? You need to bear in mind that sartorius is the tailor muscle. Why do we call it tailor muscle? Because it's the longest muscle in the body. It's just like a tailor. You know the tape rule they used to measure clothes? Yeah, of course, you know that. So it's a tailor muscle. It runs down. So whenever you ask, what is the longest muscle? Sartorius. Longest muscle. Sartorius. Longest muscle. Sartorius. Do you understand? Extremely important for you to know this. All right? Now, you talk about quadriceps muscles, powerful knee extensors, like the rectus femoris, the vastus lateralis, the vastus medialis, and vastus what? Intermedius. When you're talking about hamstring, like if you watch soccer very well, you hear, oh, hamstring, hamstring, oh, hamstring. It's also very important for you to know the hamstring muscles. The hamstring muscles are knee flexors. Remember, quadriceps, knee extensors. Hamstrings are knee flexors. All right? Knee and hip. It flexes the knee and extends the hip. So you talk about bicep femoris, you have to talk about semitendinosus and semi. So whenever you hear that, oh, that this athlete has a hamstring pull, hamstring muscle problem, you are talking about bicep femoris, you're talking about semitendinosus, you're talking about semimembranosus. All right? So as a form of recap, I'll take some questions like the study of the muscle system is known as myology. As I mentioned here, you must remember this. You must also know the key functions of the muscles. Very important for you to know because they can ask you which one is not a function of the muscular system, right? So remember that muscular system helps in stability, heat production, control of openings. That's why where we have sphincters. You remember, like you have anal sphincter. You feel like pooing or shitting, right? And you hold yourself. That is anal sphincter. We have the internal and the external. All right? When you swallow something, the sphincter seals off the esophagus so that if the food will not come from the stomach back upwards. So remember, that is a function. That's controlling openings, all right? And also breathing. We discuss muscles of respiration. But does muscles produce blood? No. No. There are a lot of things muscles doesn't do. So you must know what it does. Remember, this is physiology. Physiology is function, function, function. Also, it's very important for you to know the muscle actions, all right? Such as which muscle is a prime mover, which one is a synergist, which one is an antagonist. All right. For example, if I ask you a question, or you are asked a question that is, comparing pronator quadratus and supinator, you should know that that's an antagonistic relationship. Pronator quadratus and supinator, because pronator quadratus pronates, right? Supinator supinates. So they are working opposite each other. That is what a clear example of what an antagonistic relationship. Also, you need to know, what fascicle is. All right? You need to know what fascicle is because if they are trying to test you, they can tell you muscle fibers, are arranged in bundles called what? So this is a muscle fiber. You see, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a bundle of muscle fiber. What is this thing called? This is called a fascicle. What is covering this fascicle? Perimysium. All right? What is covering one muscle fiber? Endomysium. How about if you are tested by using a muscle attachment? You can be tested. All right? You need to know what direct and indirect is. I explained this initially. So I wanted to, mention it again. Because they can tell you, which of the following describes muscle tissues emerging directly from a bone. Emerging directly from a bone. And you are telling them this is a direct attachment. Because if it's not an indirect attachment, it won't be emerging directly. The muscle will not be emerging directly. For example, what is tendon? I told you that tendons, fibrous cord connecting muscles and the bone in an indirect attachment. So instead of the muscle attaching to the bone, it uses a tendon, it attaches to the tendon and then attaches to the bone. That's indirect attachments. All right? When you're talking about orientation of muscle, all right, you talk about fusiform, pannate, circular, triangular, and all those things. You need to know examples of each of them. At least. For example, bicep brachii, fusiform. This is usually the most common that they ask. How about if they ask you about rectus femoris? If they ask you about rectus femoris? Rectus femoris is pennate. Pennate. So if you're asked about rectus femoris, pennate, at least it's an example you cannot forget. If you forget others, you'll be forgiven. But pennate, rectus femoris, you can't forget it. When you're talking about circular, you're talking about things like orbicularis oculi, all right? So, oculi rather, and oris. All these things are circular muscles. As a recap, do you remember the muscles acting on the rotator cuff muscles, the deltoid, the P major, and the latissimus dorsi? All right? What is the relationship, if you are asked, what is the relationship between the rotator cuff muscles and the deltoid muscle? Remember, the deltoid performs the function of abduction, flexion, and extension. How about the rotator cuff muscles? What is the relationship? It is synergistic, right? They try to help each other. Do you remember what synergistic is? Do you remember what synergistic is? They try to help the prime mover. They help each other to do better. So that is the relationship. Remember this relationship because it's a very common question. Also, I forgot to mention that another example of fusiform is semitendinosus. It's even more common than the bicep brachii. So when you are remembering the rectus femoris for Panet, always remember semitendinosus for what? Fusiform. Semitendinosus for what? Fusiform. Panet, rectus femoris. Panet, rectus femoris. As a recap for the respiration, can you remember what I told you is the prime mover of inspiration? What is the prime mover? It is what? Diaphragm. It is what? Diaphragm. Extremely important. So if they ask you, what is the prime mover for inhalations? It is diaphragm. If you're talking about exhaling, that is, expiration, you're talking about internal intercostal. Do you still remember what I told you about the muscles of the back? That the most superficial is trapezius and latissimus dorsi? Please, if they ask you, please always remember trapezius or latissimus dorsi. When, as far as they're talking about the extensors of the head and the most superficial muscles of the back is trapezius. Remember, trapezius is also an extensor of the head. So if they're asking you, oh, what are the extensors of the head and the one that is most superficial, they're talking about trapezius this time around. They're talking about trapezius because that's the only extensor of the head and it is also the most superficial at the back. Remember, trapezius. If they ask you which muscles are the flexors of the neck, they're talking about sternocleidomastoid and scalene. Extensors, trapezius, splenius muscle. Rotators, semispinalis. Another thing you can be tested on is the convergence of several muscles of the lower face or of the face. That convergence, that if you just hear the point of convergence, they're talking about what? The modulus. It's very, very important. This is a landmark. Remember, anatomy is location, location, location. Physiology, as I said, is function, function, function. So remember the modulus is a landmark, it's a marker for convergence of several facial muscles. Extremely important. Also, they can ask you which muscle of mastication helps or is responsible for elevation of the mandible. What is the answer? If you look at it very well, you see that this is temporalis, all right? So temporalis elevates the mandible and retracts it. Masseter is very powerful. And what does it do? It elevates the mandible for chewing. But the major one that elevates the mandible is temporalis because this can be very confusing, all right? So, but the truth of the matter is that you can hardly see any of these two in one particular option. They won't give it because it's a little confusing. But this one, masseter, is specifically when you are chewing. But this one is usually at all time. Now, remember what lateral and medial pterygoid does is to control the side jaw movements. What about the abdominal wall? How about if they ask you the deepest muscles of the abdominal wall? What is it? Have you thought about it? Remember what we discussed before? The deepest layer is what? The transversus abdominis. All right? Very, very important. Or transverse abdominal muscle. This one, it lies deepest. Which one is the most superficial? External oblique. Deepest, transversus abdominis. Which one gives us six packs? Rectus abdominis. For rectus abdominis, the one that gives us six packs, there are different ways they can ask you this question. Listen to this question, for example. They may tell you the tendon or tendinous intersection that divides the dash into segments that are externally visible on the abdominal wall of a well-muscled person. What are they asking about? They're asking about six packs. For real, right? So it's rectus abdominis. So when they're talking about that tendinous intersection, right, divides into segments that is externally visible, you can see six packs. That is rectus abdominis. This question can come in different ways. It depends on which school you are in. This is just a template. It's like a skeleton for you to go and study more about these things. These special muscles I picked, muscles that have clinical implications, right? The questions most times is questions that has clinical implications. So it's very important for you to go and study these muscles in depth and be able to understand how it can be applied to your everyday questions, all right? Also, they can want you to, they may want to try you in different arrangements, all right? Like, I need you to be very particular about this arrangement because there are a lot of questions about it. Fusiform semitendinosis, Pennant, remember the rectus femoris? Let me give bold in it. Remember the rectus femoris, all right? Very, very important. Now, what if they ask you parallel? You remember the rectus abdominis. This can be very confusing. The triangular, you talk about the P major, that's the pectoralis major, the one that's our chest muscle. Let me make it bolder for you to be able to remember it. So, parallel rectus abdominis, pennant rectus femoris. So, because they can ask you a question, they can be like, the rectus abdominis is dash muscle. Why the rectus femoris is dash? So the rectus abdominis is actually parallel. Why the rectus femoris is what? Pennant or bipennate. It can be pennant, it can be bipennate because we have unipennate, bipennate, multipennate. But rectus femoris is specifically bipennate, right? So remember that. Also, in this muscle of respiration, the prime mover, that is the diaphragm, is being innervated by a phrenic nerve. Phrenic nerve. All right? Phrenic is Phrenic. That nerve helps to innervate the diaphragm. Don't forget this. They always test it because that phrenic nerve is extremely important. All right? It doesn't just innervate the diaphragm, it innervates a lot of abdominals. All right? So that's why you must know that the phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm specifically. Also, one thing I forget about the sit muscle, to tell you about the sit muscle, is the one that is most commonly injured. So if you are given a question about which of the sit muscle is the most commonly tear, you understand which one does the tendon tear the most? It is supraspinatus. It is this particular one, supraspinatus. That's the one that's always commonly teared. Please, this question you cannot play with it because as I mentioned to you, one of the reasons why I'm selecting these particular muscles to talk about is because they have clinical implication. It's just like if I ask you, or if they ask you something about levator scapulae, can you remember exactly what levator scapulae does? Can you remember? Write it down in the box, in the comment section. But bear in mind that levator scapulae, if they ask you what is true about levator scapulae, you tell them that it flexes the neck laterally if the scapula is fixed. All right? So I mentioned that it elevates scapula. Most importantly, it flexes the neck laterally if the scapula is what? Fixed. But if the scapula is not fixed, then it will elevate the scapula. So remember this information about the levator scapulae. It's something that they want to test you on. If, for example, you are asked something about muscle of the arm, maybe relationship, for example, they tell you this is extensor group, this is flexor group, right? Now, this extensor group is extending, flexor group is flexing, meaning that anything here we oppose this. That's what relationship? Antagonistic relationship. So if, for example, they pick, the triceps, and which one should I pick now? The bicep brachii. You tell them that it is antagonistic. Because they may tell you the dash antagonizes the tricep brachii. So what you need to do, this is the tricep brachii. Look for any of them in the bicep, the flexors will definitely antagonize the tricep brachii. Most often this is the bicep brachii. Always remember this because both of them are in opposite positions. If you are asked in the exam and dash muscle is contained within a region, whereas a dash or undash muscle acts upon one region but has an attachment elsewhere. What are we talking about? Intrinsic and extrinsic. I've already described this before, so I don't want to keep going back to it. All right? But this is something that is very common. They can ask you this question in any way. It can be extrinsic and intrinsic. But please, when they ask you this question, they usually give you intrinsic and extrinsic together. Make sure you arrange it properly. You understand? Because intrinsic is contained within that area. So dash muscle is contained within a region. Write down intrinsic. Then do the second part. all right? So that you don't go and write extrinsic and intrinsic, because both of them will be in the option, usually. And finally, can you remember what I told you is the retinaculum? What is a retinaculum? Think. I said, band of connection, connective tissue that stabilizes what? A group of tendon. All right? So this is very, very important for you to know. There are a lot of questions. I just discussed almost 40 questions with you. All right? Maybe next time I can do another video to discuss another group of muscles that are very, very important. But for now, these are the muscles that have one of the greatest clinical importance, and you really need to go through them one after the other. I want you to watch this video 2, 3, 4, 5 times as a review. You understand? Especially if you're in a college in the US or within outskirts of the US. It's very, very important for you, because this is, some of the questions that that could be used to set your exams. Even if not exactly the same question, but questions that are very similar. Mind you, this does not substitute for your lecture slides. Make sure you prepare very well for your exams. Read your lecture slides, then use this one, to support yourself, maybe on the night of your exam or a day before your exam. Very, very important. So thank you very much for paying attention. I appreciate you. Please, I want you to leave comments. I want you to leave a like if you like this video. I want you to tell me what topic you want to discuss next, what topic you want me to generate questions on next. By so doing, I'll be able to know what to give out to you. All right? Finally, please subscribe to this channel. All right? Kindly subscribe to the channel. Click on the notification button so that you'll be able to get to the next video that I'm going to make probably next week. All right? Don't forget to do this. Thank you.